Welcome to the Taxing Subjects Podcast. I'm Ryan Norton. Now, this episode will coincide with the How Did Your Filing Season Go survey, and that's something that we recently sent out to tax professionals across the country. In it, we asked them about their clients' experience with the new Form 1040, changes to withholding, and if they considered this filing season to be more difficult than previous years. To join me in this discussion is Jim Lowe, EA. He's been a tax professional for 25 years, and he and his wife, Jody, own AVL Tax Professionals located in Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Great to be back. Thanks, Ryan.
It's great to have you, and I am really interested for your take on this filing season. I know that there has been some questions surrounding whether or not the tax law changes had an impact on all the aspects of preparing tax, whether it's questions from clients or if it's just getting materials through the IRS. And so we'll just kind of go through that. But let's first start by talking about your tax practice. What kind of returns do you prepare, and what services do you offer clients?
Our office is pretty much individual tax returns. We have, I'd say 90% individual, 10% business returns. And we just focus on tax preparation and tax planning. So we don't do a lot of accounting or payroll, but it's mostly tax returns.
Part of being a successful tax professional is research and training. With all the changes that were implemented this year, did you feel prepared once filing season was underway?
Well, we thought so. We started in early June attending seminars. As we went through the summer into the fall, what we heard in June had already changed by September. The last one we did was the Drake update here in Franklin in January. We chose that one because we thought, well, by that time, everything should be pretty much decided, settled. Yeah. So we left here feeling pretty confident, but this was before my time, but I believe there was a sweeping tax change in the 80s. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have compared this tax change, this reform to those years. So it was just a trickle effect all during tax season where you thought you really got it, but then you read something else and, it never ended, it seemed like.
It doesn't sound like you could have done much differently because you went to the training.
No.
Year.
I don't regret. I don't think there was anything else we could have done differently, but the broad sweeping change affected so many aspects of the tax return that you may have had one client that had a specific situation that you couldn't have foreseen and understood how the tax bill was going to affect that.
This next question is not necessarily tied to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but to a different, very high-profile change that affected this filing season. How many clients had questions about the new Form 1040?
I don't know so much about the form itself. Some clients like to look at that form line by line. Mm. Other people just want to know, was I able to deduct my medical expenses? The ones that really wanted to, in our office, what we prefer to do, if we can get the client to come in and sit down when they pick up their tax return, is to go over it line by line. Mm. So that presented a challenge more to us than it did to them, because having looked at the old 1040 for 25 years, and generally what I'll do is I'll sit with my client, I'll turn the tax return upside down because I basically have it memorized. Right. And I could just say, well, this line is so-and-so and so. Well, it was very difficult, especially for us for the first month or so.
Well, Jim, speaking of the new Form 1040, what did you think of it from a preparer's perspective? You talked about like having to walk clients through, and it was a little more difficult, and that was one aspect of it. But what did you think when you first saw it?
Man, when we first saw it, my first thought was, they took the 1040 and took a pair of scissors and cut it up and put it on 5 different pages.
Yep.
And I guess if you folded the 1040 in half, it would be the large size of a postcard. But I'm telling you, from understanding how a 1040 flows for all the years that I've done taxes, this one does not flow. And there's no add this, subtract this on the 1040 itself. It's all done on schedule. So when you're looking at the 1040 and you see a number, you're like, well, where is the IRA deduction, or where is the student loan interest deduction, or all these things, because they're on a different schedule, but they don't flow nicely on the 1040.
Right.
And the math is not there. So for us, even to review a tax return was very time consuming, just getting used to it and making sure that, because before you could just look at the 1040, the first and second page, and you could spot immediately if what you knew should be there was there.
Right.
In this instance, it was looking at numerous schedules, and I still, to this point, don't understand the need for the change, but it is what it is.
Now, the next question is not necessarily about the new Form 1040, but more about reports that were coming out early in filing season. According to IRS's cumulative stats through the week of April 19th, they said that the total amount of refund dollars issued and the average return amount were down 1.7% and 2% respectively. Now, the early reports had kind of signaled that might be the case, and then as with anything where you're getting a lot of data in, it's going to fluctuate. But by the time we hit the week of tax day, it looked like numbers were down. And if you look at the numbers that have been released, I think as of last week or the week before, so in May, those numbers are still down. Does that line up with what you saw this season?
I think pretty much so. What I find interesting in those stats is nothing about how much more people owed with their tax return rather than a refund, which we saw quite a bit of. But it was an issue. And so as I said before, if we can go over the tax return with the client, usually what we would do is use Drake's comparison worksheet, show them the changes, incomes up or down, deductions up or down, here's your tax, here's what you paid in, all that kind of thing. It was a little more difficult this year, but withholding was definitely lower, I would say, in 75% of the cases for our clients. Now, for some people, that was okay. It just meant a lower refund, or they may have come out about the same because of the additional child tax credit, those types of things. But overall, we tried to focus on, because there was really hardly any way to comfort people other than saying, we would go down to the income tax line and say, last year, Uncle Sam kept X amount. This year, he only kept this amount. And generally, for, I'd say, a good percentage of our clients, the tax itself was lower. But that didn't make them feel any better if they had to write out a check or their direct deposit was much less than the year before. Yeah. So there was also, we were trying to educate our clients that Uncle Sam kept less. You just got more during the year. But again, when you're expecting a refund like you had for the past few years and you didn't get it, it was a hard pill to swallow. And it took a lot more customer service and client face time than ever.
Yeah. Speaking of them looking forward and trying to avoid a similar situation, if they had either a lower than expected or even had to sign that check, how many of them were familiar with filling out a W-4?
Oh, very few. And generally only people that had changed jobs. So there was a lot, a lot of discussion about what they needed to do. And of course, it's very difficult to say, well, you just need to file one exemption or zero exemptions, because who knows what the tax chart is going to do at their wage base. So we would just say, listen, you need an extra $2,000 to break even next year. You just need to go in with your employer and figure out per paycheck how much that's going to be, and make sure you have that taken out so you're not in the same position the next year.
what would you say was your biggest challenge this past season amongst all the myriad challenges that could have been presented because of sweeping tax legislation or other issues?
Well, there's a few of them, not just one. I think the first one is itemized deductions. Just trying to explain to clients, can I still take my car tax, or I heard I can't take my charitable contributions. I heard medical expenses don't count anymore. And of course, with taxes, there's never a definite maybe. It's a maybe or maybe not, depending. Yeah. So trying to explain to them the jump in the standard deduction versus what they had to itemize when they've been used to itemizing in the past. So that was a big one. And even when you would get to the end of the tax return and you would say, well, your itemized deductions only came up to $18,000, but since you're married, your standard deduction's $24,000, it's higher. They would say, well, can I still take my medical expenses? So it was still very difficult and they felt as though the government was cheating them, like they were taking away something. And that's not to mention people in a position where they could no longer deduct unreimbursed employee expenses, home office for employees. That was a tough one when people were used to that. And of course, even though that was compensated for in many ways by the reduction in the tax rates and all those types of things, there was still this idea that, I've just lost a deduction that I've always had, and that was a tough one. And then, not to mention QBI.
Yeah.
And the nightmare that ensued with that. Some things that pop out in my mind. Rental property. I mentioned we started education in June. No rental property is going to qualify. Then we go to September. Well, maybe some will. We get to here to Franklin. We learn that probably most all rental properties will qualify. There's still, within the industry discussions between different facets of tax preparation. So we joined a number of groups on Facebook. One of them was actually a 1099A Facebook page. It was really, really helpful with some real knowledgeable guys that really understood the law much better than we did. So that was helpful. There was issues with self-employed health insurance for S corporation owners. There was discussion that wasn't even decided, till we got into maybe the 1st of March, whether that deduction was going to be affected by QBI. So it was just one thing after another. But those are two big ones that pop out in my mind. Not to mention new due diligence for head of household filers.
Right. And the QBI example, I think, is apt because it just illustrates what you said earlier about how the information you're getting was the most current information available at the time. And then it kind of trickled through and something would change or be clarified.
Yes, and we had we had guidance still coming out into tax season.
Mm-hmm.
And software companies still trying to finalize the software, well into January, early February. So there was continual unknowns, and it was a very insecure tax season.
Yeah.
From a preparer perspective.
This one is more of a recent events question because I think it was just last week the IRS announced that the Schedule D had a calculation error in it. Did any of your clients, were they affected by this?
I think I have a few. I haven't had a chance to check many. I did check one client that sold some rental property, and it appears that they overpaid maybe by a couple $1,000s. So we're still not sure if the IRS is going to make that correction and take care of that taxpayer themselves, if we have to correct the return. But it's just another example of how the IRS was not prepared for this sweeping tax change. So will this be the last one? Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't know.
And finally, just to close out the podcast for the day, in her annual report to Congress, the National Taxpayer Advocate said that the government shutdown would affect filing season. She cited a pretty significant backlog of work, and here's like 3 data points from that. 5 million unprocessed letters, 80,000 unaddressed fiscal year 2018 EITC audits, and then third, 87,000 unprocessed amended returns. Did you experience any issues like getting through the IRS or having things processed? Did her prediction pan out?
From my perspective, it's always slow. And clients, if you suggest they call the IRS, of course, there was 3 weeks where they couldn't.
Right.
So we had a few clients frustrated by that. The biggest thing I noticed was now, after the fact, after tax season, the delay in processing amended returns. Mm-hmm. It seems when a client gets a North Carolina amended return before they get a federal amended refund, then you know that the IRS is backlogged in that respect. But there's always a delay in notices and so forth. But I personally didn't see a huge difference. Tax season wasn't delayed. The IRS was able to get things up and going as they planned. The software folks worked hard to get it, off the ground in time. And I didn't really notice any refund delays. However, I would say because of the security issues the IRS has implemented, we've seen more delays in refunds this year, and it appears to be pinpointed on W-2 forms that employers did not submit to the Social Security Administration. They gave them to their employees. The employees, prepared their returns, but we still have some from March that still have not funded, and it appears that the reason is because those employers did not submit the W-2s. So that's problematic. And in relation to notices from the IRS, these clients haven't heard anything from the IRS, so you have to wonder, is that because they're behind from the shutdown? Is a possibility. Yeah, it's just hard to tell.
Well, Jim, thank you for coming by and sharing your experience with this last filing season. I hope that next filing season is a little less rocky, and hopefully, let's cross our fingers that there aren't a number of fixes coming down the road. Hopefully things are the way they should be.
Yes. Well, we have a lot more time for education this year, so everything should, I think, get itself straightened out by next tax season.
Here's to hoping. And if you want to download the How Did Your Tax Season Go survey that we sent out, just make sure you go to drakesoftware.com /blog, and you can see on the right-hand side of the page, there'll be a downloads tab. You just click that, and it'll take you to our downloads page, and it should be the very top one. So that's a little extra for people who are listening. Jim, thank you again.
Great. Thanks. Glad to be here.
We'll see you all on the next Taxing Subjects podcast.